time for a humanitarian response to the suffering of civilians in Gaza is now, not tomorrow, not when this conflict finally ends. After more than 70 days of hostilities, the situation in Gaza is dire. The remaining hostages must be released immediately. Civilians and civilian facilities must be protected. This is not just a moral or ethical choice, it is an obligation under international humanitarian law, as is humanitarian access. The amount of aid allowed into Gaza must be substantially increased to meet the needs of the people who depend on it throughout Gaza and should contain all essential items, including fuel. Egypt's efforts to facilitate the use of Rafah crossing by United Nations humanitarian agencies and their implementing partners has been crucial. We welcome the recent announcement by Israel of the opening of the Kerem Shalom crossing for the direct delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Brazil calls for the full implementation of the adopted resolutions. Today's resolution provides for a monitoring mechanism for the UN to inspect the delivery of aid. The UN must be provided with the necessary means to carry out this task. The aim is to increase and expedite the entry and delivery of much-needed international assistance. The Council must remain seized of the matter for as long as it takes. And Mr. President, since this is probably our last formal session during our current mandate, I would like to thank all members of this Council for the trust and cooperation with our delegation during these 2 years. I speak on behalf of my entire delegation and of my capital in expressing how much we appreciated working with all of you at different levels and in a vast array of very important topics on the UN agenda of peace and security. We end our term with a sense of accomplishment of the priorities that Brazil always sets when discharging its duties at the UN in general and as a non-permanent member of this Council. We tried our best to engage constructively with all delegations in order to achieve concrete results in this vast and complex agenda of international peace and security in a growingly complex and challenging world. 5 participations of our foreign minister at Council meetings in October, in November on the Palestine question illustrate the importance we attach to the Council and to the matters under its consideration. We championed our positions while respecting the diversity of values, opinions, and interests within the Council in order to adequately fulfill our role as a non-permanent member for the 11th time in this body's history. Once again, with President Lula's leadership and personal involvement, Brazil tried hard to make a serious contribution to this collective effort by just being Brazil, the Brazil that is back, a country that talks to every country in the friendliest ways, has no quarrels except with poverty, inequality, and inhumanity and injustice, has an engaged interest in all important matters discussed in the UN, that builds bridges, seeks consensus, acts faithfully as an honest broker, and values and defends peace, the international law, multilateralism, and their synthesis and symbol, the Charter of the United Nations. And most of all, if I may borrow Lincoln's words, a country that acts without malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. And if I may add a personal note, I'm most thankful for these 6 months of crash course in multilateral affairs in this worldly classroom. You, dear colleagues, and your teams have all been wonderful teachers to this old bilateralist who hopes to have learned at least some of the multiple skills and statesmanship that you show here every single session. Thank you very much again, and happy holidays. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante de Brasil por su declaración. Tiene ahora la palabra la representante de Malta.
Thank you, President. And Malta thanks the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to work on this resolution. I express our appreciation to Ambassador Noseba and her team for their valiant efforts and for organizing the very important trip to Rafah. Malta has consistently expressed grave concern and sought to alleviate the dire humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Over the past 3 months, this humanitarian crisis has been severely aggravated by the obstruction of adequate emergency humanitarian aid, personnel, and food and water into Gaza. The untenable situation required our urgent attention. This is why we have voted in favor of this text, and we demand for the full implementation of this and Resolution 2712. However, we remain firm in our belief that an immediate ceasefire is the only tangible and realistic measure that can ease the suffering and extreme hardship of the Gazan people. We reiterate that all parties must comply with their obligations under international law, including those regarding the protection of civilians and civilian sites, with accountability for those who violate them. Medical and humanitarian personnel and their assets must be protected to allow the population safety, reprieve, dignity, and in times of acute crisis and anguish. We are already much too late. We welcome the establishment of an aid monitoring mechanism for Gaza as outlined in this resolution. However, its implementation must not add an additional barrier or slow down the principled delivery of humanitarian assistance. On the contrary, it should rapidly and efficiently facilitate it. We expect that the technical expertise and vast experience of the UN will direct the implementation of this mechanism in coordination with relevant states. Without this, the desperately needed UN humanitarian response will be placed in jeopardy, and the UN and humanitarian staff be placed at great risk. In closing, President, the end of hostilities must also be accompanied with a political urgency to build a durable foundation for peace. We welcome the resolution's clear and unwavering commitment to the two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
Agradezco a la representante de Malta por su declaración. Tiene ahora la palabra el representante de China.
主席先生，安理会今天这次表决一再推迟，受到各方广泛关注。在过去几天里，为最大限度凝聚共识，阿联酋代表团做出了不懈努力，于昨天深夜重新提交了决议草案。我们对安理会刚刚表决通过这项决议草案表示欢迎。因为众所周知的原因，这项决议草案在一些重要方面做了不少调整，与我们努力的方向并不一致，并没有达到我们的预期。同时，考虑到当前紧迫形势和加沙地带日甚一日的人道灾难，安理会的这次行动至少还是为推动人道物资更多、更快进入加沙带来一线希望。当然，能否让灾难中的加沙民众真正感受到这一线希望，还取决于决议能否切实得到执行，决议有关要求能否不折不扣地落到实处。我们期待根据安理会决议要求，采取紧急行动，扩大对加沙的人道援助，包括充分利用凯雷姆沙洛姆过境点，并增开其他过境点，确保充足的人道物资安全和不受阻碍地进入加沙。我们希望决议新确立的监督机制尽快到位，期待秘书长及时向安理会报告决议执行情况。安理会应该随时准备采取进一步行动，解决决议执行中遇到的问题和困难。 决议重申，冲突各方都应该遵守国际法，包括国际人道法规定的义务。我们敦促以色列立即改弦更张，停止无差别军事进攻，停止对加沙民众的集体惩罚。作为占领方，以色列有义务保障加沙民众的人道需求，有义务保障在加沙的人道工作者安全。主席先生，应该看到，实现停火仍然是压倒一切的前提。只有停火，才能避免更大的平民，包括人质伤亡。只有停火，才能避免地区冲突走向失控。只有停火，才能避免政治解决前景彻底葬送。这也是我们投票支持俄罗斯修正案的原因。同时，我们也对修正案被否决感到遗憾。下一步，中方愿同各位成员一道，继续推动安理会及时采取进一步负责任、有意义的行动，继续为早日平息加沙战火、切实落实两国方案、实现中东和平稳定做出不懈努力。谢谢主席。
Agradezco al representante de China por su declaración. Tiene ahora la palabra el representante de Japón.
Thank you, Mr. President. The catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza needs urgent attention and meaningful action by this Council. Thus, we are deeply grateful for the UAE and our friends in the Arab group for their constructive engagement with all Council members to this end. Japan voted in favor of this resolution. Given the deepening humanitarian crisis, it is indispensable to immediately scale up emergency assistance to and throughout Gaza. There is no safe place for the people in Gaza, and they cannot wait any longer for the Council to act. We also demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Therefore, we are pleased that the Council finally adopted another resolution today to address urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza, and we hope this will be a first step towards real change on the ground. Mr. President, full-fledged but sensitive diplomacy is underway to further scale up emergency humanitarian assistance to Gaza. In this vein, we highly appreciate the serious diplomatic efforts that the United States has been conducting in the region to improve the situation on the ground. The entry of humanitarian convoys into Gaza through the Kerem Shalom crossing is one of the results of these efforts, but more needs to be done. Japan, as a responsible member of the Security Council, remains committed to addressing the devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Even now, gunfire and bombardment continue, and this must stop immediately for a period that allows for meaningful humanitarian operation to aid those who are enduring this grave humanitarian catastrophe and suffering. Thank you, President.
Agradezco al representante de Japón por su declaración. Tiene ahora la palabra la representante de Suiza.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Suisse a voté en faveur de la résolution et se félicite de son adoption. Je tiens à remercier la délégation émirati et toutes et tous les collègues, membres du Conseil, mais aussi de la région, pour les efforts inlassables dans la recherche d'un compromis afin de pallier à la situation humanitaire catastrophique dans la bande de Gaza. Il est essentiel que ce Conseil se prononce en faveur de la protection des civils. Les images du point de passage de Rafah l'illustrent clairement. La population civile est désespérée. Elle a besoin du soutien immédiat de la communauté internationale.